And then for this in particular, I really had bulleted out, here's all the moments I know I want in the movie. And then I kind of would just pick on the day, okay, well, I'll do these three. And it was very freeing to kind of not have to go in order.
Welcome everyone on We Need to Talk About Oscar. Today's guest is Colby, the screenwriter of Spaceman. Hi Colby, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fine too. Thank you for asking. First of all, Spaceman is fresh off from debuting in Berlin, which is of course one of the biggest film festivals in the world. How does it feel that your first feature got into such a prestigious place?
It feels really crazy. Every piece of the movie puzzled together in a way where it was just a screenplay with no one attached, and then it was a screenplay for Johan, and then it was a screenplay for Adam, and every single step of it has kind of become a big trippy, oh, okay, so it's that kind of movie. And then to have it premiere at Berlin was just sort of the icing on the top of the cake at the end of that. Very cool.
Mm, I can imagine, yeah. In the beginning of interviews, we like to ask people regarding their core memories of films. Do you maybe have an experience or memory that made you want to become a filmmaker too?
So many. I really grew up, I think, at the movies. My parents are people who still to this day, see every movie that comes out. So I think we were just at every movie. And then I remember as a kid there was a show on the Discovery Channel that was just about special effects. And I remember seeing them show, here's how they made the Terminator and here's how they did the Back to the Future car. And that kind of unlocked for me, oh, people make this stuff that you see. And that sort of opened my eyes to like, oh, I could be a person who makes that stuff. And we had a VHS camera that my dad's business had that we took home one day and just never returned to them. And so that became our little, my brother and I, who's a couple years younger, started making, very bad versions of the X-Files and Spider-Man and stuff at our house as, 10-year-olds. And that was it. Was hooked.
So cool. I know you're coming from the theater side. Could you share how it was for you to take this leap to the film industry and just in general, how different it is to be a playwright versus a screenwriter?
Yeah, movies are where I wanted to be. So I took this kind of circuitous route where I went to NYU and everybody I knew there was an actor. And so the idea of going and making a movie with no money and no idea how to do it felt crazy. Whereas the idea of making a play with no money and no idea how to do it felt possible. You just need a basement somewhere. And so I think I kind of fell into becoming a playwright, and I feel really grateful that I did, because I think it really lets you hone your ability to work with actors, your ability to work with designers, your ability to write a scene and then have someone ask you, why does this happen? And then you have to explain why that's the scene. And so I think it kind of doing theater kind of became a grad school for me in a certain way of like, oh, you just have to do a lot of work and see it happen and get it on its feet. And, I think in the theater, the playwright is in charge of everything. You have directors of shows, but really your playwright is sort of the final decision of what a play will be. And so I think the big, complicated, interesting transition to go from that to the film business is you no longer have a little play in a basement. You have an enormous production with hundreds of people and millions of dollars on the line, and movie stars and directors and lots of creative voices who have as much, if not more, say in what the product will be than you. And so I think being able to come from a world where I felt really confident in what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it was really, really valuable to then come into writing movies, which isn't creatively that different, but is so much higher stakes and higher pressure. It's the equivalent of if you want to paint a painting and nobody's buying it, that's one thing. If you want to paint a painting and someone's spending $30 million on it, they are going to have an opinion about what's in the painting. So I think that is a really big leap to make from a little indie theater down under the stairs to, a giant production with Netflix where you have a lot of shareholders, which, makes art complicated.
Yeah, definitely. And what drew you to adapt Spaceman of Bohemia in the first place?
I had been sent the book by our first producer, Michael Peretz, who I had met previously and really liked. And I think especially when you're newer in your career, which I was, a lot of the stuff you get sent as sort of like, here's an interesting idea, maybe this could be a movie, tends to be stuff that is exactly that. There's maybe an interesting idea in there, but it didn't quite work, or it's not the most literary, or maybe as a movie it would work better. And what really struck me about reading Yaroslav's book is that it was just a brilliant piece of literature. It was a beautiful book already. And so the idea of getting to adapt something that really affected me profoundly and really moved me and felt really strange and interesting and complicated just was so exciting as a writer, with this idea that, oh, I have an incredible piece of framework already with which to work. And if I can just get people to walk away with an emotional experience similar to what the book did to me, I will have done my job. And so that to me was the exciting thing, was it already really worked. And so it felt like, oh, maybe there's a way.
And apart from the book, obviously, did you have any other influences or something that you could use as a reference for creating this film, other books or films?
I have read a lot of, this maybe is a stretch, but I've read a lot of David Mitchell's books in the last few years, Cloud Atlas and The Bone Clocks. And he has a bunch of books that kind of do this thing structurally where the story feels like a circle. And so you kind of start at the beginning and you unfold the story and you don't really know where the story is going. And then by the end of the story, you realize you're at the beginning again, but something is different. And I love that structure so much. And so I don't know that I was thinking about it when I was writing it, but Spaceman very much is a sort of circle story where you're starting in one place and the whole time you're heading literally towards something called the beginning, which is also then going to be the ending. And I think that kind of, how do you open and close a book at the same moment, was always really appealing to me as a kind of structural challenge. And so I think that was probably my biggest unconscious influence, was trying to kind of copy that circle of a story and make that work for the movie.
And how did you approach the process of condensing this entire novel into the screenplay? I think
It's really hard.
probably, very challenging for many people. Yeah.
It's really hard. The book is incredibly dense, and it's all a memory play where you're seeing Jakub's, all of the foundational memories of Jakub's life. So you're learning about his grandparents, and you're learning about his parents, and you're learning about the fall of the Soviet Union and the birth of the Czech Republic, and all these things that are really beautiful and important and are part of why the book impacted me so much. And when I first pitched the idea of adapting the book, the financiers were very excited about it. And they said, also, it should not be a 3-hour film about the fall of the Soviet Union. It's like, oh, of course, of course. And then my first draft was like a 3-hour film. It's really hard to know how to get the emotion of the book onto the screen in a way where you still follow enough of the story. And so what I wanted to do was try to capture as much of the emotion of the book with as little information as we could have. And I have to credit our producer, Michael. The first draft of the movie did the whole book, and he very wisely said, I think you could cut about half of the book out of this. And so the movie, not to spoil the book or the movie, but the movie ends at a place where the book keeps going, and there's a significant amount of story after that. But it all sort of felt like it carried the same emotion of sort of closure. And so the goal at that point, once I had a first draft, was, can you capture the feeling of the rest of the book without needing to tell that much story, just for purposes of real estate? Because it's, a screenplay is a page a minute. And so if you have a 300-page book, you're going to lose at least half the book. It's a challenge.
How long did it take to write this 3-hour-long first draft?
Writing the first draft was really fast because there is a book. And so I kind of took my favorite scenes from the book and put them into a screenwriting program, and just with sort of bullet points of like, I love this, I love this, I love this, I love this. I want to capture all of these things. And then wrote the movie based on that and wrote it out of order, which I had not done before, but was really a kind of magical way to adapt something. Was I just sort of wrote the scenes I wanted to write that day, and it made it work really, really quickly. And then I ended up stitching everything together from there. But I started writing the screenplay in the spring of 2018. I finished a draft in the summer, and then sort of turned in the first like real official, here's the final first draft at the end of the year. So maybe 6 months from start to here's a draft I'm really excited about that people should be allowed to read.
You mentioned that you wrote it out of order, basically. My next question was going to be about your writing process, because I know that there are writers who can just sit down and write X pages a day, but there are others who can only write when they really feel like writing. How do you usually handle this?
I try to write every day, and I try to write 5 pages, and I need that structure to have a goal and a deadline, and it also helps me to say, okay, I'll be done in 6 weeks, and I try to be really dedicated to doing that, and that just is what works for me. I think if I was waiting to feel inspired, I don't know that I would get anything done. I think I just have to do it and hope that doing it makes me feel inspired after the fact. And then once I'm working, I am having a fun time, but it's the sitting down and doing it that's tough. So I have to work in the morning. I work until I've done 5 pages of script. I can do more than that, but once I've done that, I can quit and be done for the day. And then for this in particular, I really had bulleted out, here's all the moments I know I want in the movie. And then I kind of would just pick on the day, okay, well, I'll do these 3. And it was very freeing to kind of not have to go in order. It kept me from getting stuck. I think a lot of times when I'm writing in chronological order, you don't really know what happens next. And then you get stuck and you are trying to figure out, what do I do? And so it was kind of freeing to just say, oh, I don't know that I want to do this scene today. I'll just skip to the end and do that instead. It was like a magical way to get it done. And then you find out that some of those scenes you didn't want to write, you don't need. And then you find out that some of those scenes you didn't want to write, a week later, you have a good idea. So it was a fun, interesting way to do it. And one I basically always use at this point now. But it felt like a crazy idea at the time.
Regarding the story itself, Spaceman explores both the vastness of outer space and the intricacies of human emotions. How did you balance these dual aspects? I mean, the balance between when to lean into science fiction elements and when to emphasize the intimate and dramatic parts.
I think that the book always had a really good grasp on the fact that this was a story about Jakub and his experience given a bizarre circumstance. And so to me, I really wanted to focus on a character's emotional journey, given that they were in an isolated, strange science fiction environment. But I have worked a lot in genre, and I love space and I love science, and I think it's all really interesting and fascinating, and also opens up your understanding of who you are as a person within the scope of the universe. So to me, it was always about, how do you use that color within your toolkit to then also be exploring the human condition. So I don't know that I was thinking about it as sci-fi moments versus character moments. I think it was just, how do you tell a character story given that you're, within the realm of a science fiction story?
Well, I'm pretty sure that this is not a new thing, but I'm just discovering what I would describe as quoted relationship dramas. For example, as Spaceman does this film basically about a marriage crisis, but in a science fiction setting. Or like a similar example for me would be Anatomy of a Fall, because it is also about a failing marriage, but in this courtroom drama. And I just really love to discover this, I don't know, subgenre.
Well, what I loved about the book and Yaroslav's conception was the idea of the fact that there were so many different things going on. It felt like a kind of indescribable entity. There was science fiction happening, there was relationship drama happening, there was like absurdist Eastern European politics going on. And so it felt like this strange amalgamation of different ideas and types of story that kind of all coalesced into something really interesting and unique. And I think that that is what initially sparked to me as something, well, I have to do this because it felt unlike anything I had seen before in terms of the ingredients it was using and how and why they fit together. Yeah, so I love to tell a simple human story, but within the confines of like a very, very weird out there genre element or something. It just makes it that much more fun to sink your teeth into.
Yeah, I think there's also beautiful world building in Spaceman because you just give hints to the audience and nothing is in your face, but still I could get the points of how this alternative universe works. And how did you approach the world building aspects of the screenplay while basically always maintaining this character-driven narrative?
The book has so much of it. So much of the story is about the birth of this specific mission and why Jakub is chosen and why the Chopra cloud is of interest to scientists, and all of that stuff was really fascinating to me, and stuff that initially I wanted to keep and protect and felt like the initial conception of the film needed that stuff. And then, once Johan came on board, he was very, very focused about those things being interesting color, but not the primary story to him. The primary story to him really felt like this relationship story. And so it became, with each iteration, less and less about the texture of the world, and more about the intimate, emotional story of this couple and of Jakub and Hanush. And so I think that we maintained the textures of the world, but we winnowed back with each iteration, whether it was script to screen to edit, how much of that information do you need to know to go on the emotional journey? And every time we asked, do you need to know this? It was sort of like, not really. Like, we can just go on the ride and figure it out for ourselves.
I wanted to talk about the relationship between Jakub and Hanush.
It's my favorite relationship.
Yeah. In my reading, Hanush is a part of Jakub's subconscious, or more specifically, the guilt that Jakub is feeling. Because the first time that Hanush appeared was at a time when Jakub probably already knew that his relationship with Lenka had gone sideways. Can you talk a little bit about what you think Hanush takes in this story, what role it takes?
Hanush is a great question. When I first was going to adapt it, I wanted to talk to Jaroslav because I wanted to ask him whether he believed Hanush was real and whether he cared what the audience thought, like whether there was a definitive answer to him, because I didn't want to get it wrong. I had my impression, but I didn't want to do him a disservice and decide for him. And his answer was that he had an opinion, but it didn't matter. Mm-hmm. And that I was so excited to hear, because I had an opinion too, but I also thought, well, what does my opinion mean to an audience? It's their interpretation of the character after the fact that matters. So to me, I would argue that Hanush is real, but then you start to get into the definition of what even is real, and is something that is a manifestation of your guilt any less real than something that exists in physical space. And I was always interested in Hanush being a character that felt like a looking glass, and felt like a mirror to Jakub, and while being something who could sort of dig into Jakub's guilt and his loneliness, I also wanted to make sure that Hanush had his own kind of point of view and his own outlook and his own kind of growth as a character, because I think that that is, to me, what made it an interesting relationship, is not that they are digging into just Jakub, but that they are both kind of changed by one another. And so I think that, Hanush operates as a metaphor, but I hope also operates as a character who is transforming in kind of a parallel but separate journey from Jakub.
I also think that this entire space mission can sort of be put into quotation marks because it can serve as a really nice metaphor for being isolated in a marriage. Unfortunately, probably there are many people who felt or feel lonely in their relationships when their partner has other priorities in life, just like Lenka feels alone in the film. Can you expand a bit on what you think of the relationship of Jakub and Lenka, or how it translates to modern day relationships?
I was very interested in Lenka as a character who sort of began a relationship with Jakub, knowing somewhere deep within her that there were things about it that felt impossible to reconcile. And I think that, at least as he is in the book, and I think as he is in the film, there's a certain amount of guilt and shame that he carries as a character that kind of makes him unknowable and unreachable. And so I think you're right that the mission is kind of a physical way to do exactly that, which is just send him as far away as humanly possible, literally as far away as humanly possible. But I think it's something that was always part of him in their relationship, was that he was a little unknowable because of his shame. And I think that the minute that you're given the space to be apart is when you kind of can see most clearly the other person in a strange way, or your feelings about the other person. And so I think that, to me, I was always interested in Lenka being someone who didn't sign up for this and didn't want this to be her future, is to be with someone who felt impossible to connect with. And so I think that, his sort of guilt and isolation and loneliness is all a little bit self-inflicted, and this mission is sort of the most extreme way to physicalize all of those things that I think he was already doing to himself anyway, which is just with his head in the clouds and far away.
And do you, by the way, have something that you want the audiences to take away from the film?
My feeling watching the film, particularly the ending, is sort of one of so much gratitude that we exist at all. I think there's something really beautiful to the fact that these two people could fall in love and be together and impact one another. And whether or not that then is something that's permanent or forever, it is really meaningful and unique and lucky. And I think that, to me, the ending really feels like one of coming to appreciate the unlikeliness of everything that happens in our lives and how meaningful it is that any of it should happen at all, particularly when that's connection, because it's really rare and really special, even if it doesn't last forever.
Regarding the technical elements of the film, it uses a very distinct style of cinematography and visual effects. And I'm curious, how did the end result compare to what you have imagined and put on paper?
Johan is a brilliant visual stylist. I don't know that I ever could have imagined what he would do. I don't know that I'm someone who pictures it initially as I'm thinking about it. I think I like to leave a lot of room open for what will your actors do, what will your director do, what will your designers do. And I think that some of that comes from having a background in theater. Is just you have to write the thing and then a million other artists have to make it happen. So I try not to be too precious with my initial conception because it will change. But Johan was very insistent that he wanted to create a world that he hadn't seen before, and to do things in a way where he had never seen space work that way. And his conception of what Chopra looks like is really beautiful and strange and otherworldly. And there's things as big as that, and there's things as small as the fact that his camera never stops moving. It is always floating and always bobbing around and always kind of disconnected and drifty in a way that I think just captures the emotional state of the actor. So I think Johan is someone who just is a brilliant visual stylist, and I never ever could have imagined in the best way.
I also have a question about music. It plays such a significant role in setting the tone and driving the emotions. And I heard that there are writers who like to make playlists to help their creative process. Do you maybe have some sort of musical influences, or do you create such playlists?
I always end up with sort of like two like two songs that like become the song for the movie. Part of it is kind of just like to hypnotize you. There's a weird sort of mental trick to I listen to this song and then I start working. And I think it is just sort of like creating a Pavlovian response of like, oh, the minute this starts, I have to be creative. And I was listening to a lot of Max Richter doing this movie. I think he writes beautiful music and I think it's very emotionally evocative and I think it has sort of all the feelings of emotion but disconnect. And so it's very strange and wonderful that I was listening to so much of his music when I first started writing this, and then that he would want to score the film is just such a odd, lucky coincidence, and feels totally right. But I was listening to a lot of Richter's stuff.
I believe you also wrote an original screenplay that is already in post-production called In the Blink of an Eye. Could you highlight how your approach changes when writing an original screenplay versus an adapted one?
Yeah, I that film shot last spring and is in post production now, and was directed by Andrew Stanton, who did Wally and John Carter, and is sort of his return to live action filmmaking. You know, the idea of sitting and writing anything is always kind of similar, but it is never the same. And I think every time I work on anything, I end up getting about a third of the way through and panicking and being confused about like, why isn't this ever any easier? It always feels as hard as the previous one, and you'd think it would get less difficult, but it doesn't. In the Blink of an Eye started actually as a theater piece, and so I had tried to write a play that began at the beginning of time and ended at the end of time, and those were sort of my two benchmarks for how you would do the story. And believe it or not, that was an impossible play to make. So I ended up sort of with a draft of a play that never really was producible, and it weirdly ended up adapting it. It was also an adaptation, but it was an adaptation of my own thing that no one had ever looked at. So it's an oddly similar process to doing Spaceman in that I kind of I had pre-existing ideas and concepts and characters, but those are all things that I crafted over the course of several years. And I think that the difference with an original for me is it just takes so much longer because you are inventing whole cloth the world and characters and ideas, and there is no sort of underlying framework for what makes the story interesting. It's just up to you. And so I think that that's, you know, more creatively satisfying sometimes, but it's also so much more challenging because you are looking at a blank document every day and trying to figure out what would be interesting here. But I love to start crafting an original idea with a very broad idea or question, and then sort of a grab bag of just as many moments or things or visual expressions that I would want to see in that idea or question. And then I end up with way too many. And then I kind of have to call that back to like, okay, what are the ones that I would like to see in this movie that would actually fit into a story? And from there, I kind of craft a story. So I'm sort of doing it. I think I kind of tend to do it backwards, where I'm coming up with the scenes or the moments or the concepts that are really specific, and then I'm trying to kind of build a framework from there that makes that story happen. And you know, that to me feels really freeing because I'm not stuck. I'm not stuck the whole time thinking about then what would the character do. I'm actually thinking about what would make this a satisfying movie that's in this world. And then I'm working kind of backwards to figure out, okay, can I justify that happening in this movie or not? And then I find characters, and then I find their stories. And so I think it's sort of a counterintuitive way to do it, but it feels the most kind of freeing to me to get to just do anything and then have to figure out, but does that even work in here? Can I do that here?
On your website, I've seen those mysterious lines that you are currently working on projects about singing robots and haunted houses or something like that.
That's true.
Could you share something about that project or projects if there are multiple that are in development?
I'm adapting a short story by a very well-known author that I cannot talk about at all, but I'm excited about it. And then I'm also writing a script that would be for me to go direct, sort of a smaller movie that does have a singing robot in it and is sort of about late night television. It's a thing I've always loved and grew up watching, and I think it's kind of a medium that feels a little bit like movies today feel, where it's like, how does this exist in the future? Why do we make this? What purpose does this serve anymore? And so it's sort of a movie about being in a medium that feels like it's dying and trying to figure out why it is that you even care about that. And then there is also a singing robot in that movie. But that's kind of all I could say. But it would be for me to go direct. I would love to get to go make a movie that I've written. I think it would be really fun.
Are there any kinds of specific genres that you would like to try?
I would love to write a heist. I love them. I've never gotten to do anything like that. I think that the two movies that like unlocked for me, I want to make a movie were sort of like Sam Raimi's Evil Dead and Ocean's 11, which are so different. But I think there's something about that kind of like team and heist and energy and con men and like kind of underworld stuff that I love and is so different from the kind of sci-fi world I've been in lately. I would love to just be with some like schmucky guys doing bad things. Like I would love to get to do that.
And you mentioned that you wanted to try directing in the future. And I have a question about producing because I believe your wife's documentary short, The School of Canine Massage, premiered at South by Southwest yesterday, actually. Is that right?
Yes. That's why I was 5 minutes late this morning. I was at South by Southwest yesterday. Yes. So she is an incredible documentary producer in her own right and wanted to go direct something, which would have been her first directing opportunity too. And we discovered that there was a school that taught people how to massage dogs, from a friend of ours whose dog needed it and had a bad back. And we learned about this place in Ojai, and we were so surprised. And she wanted to go make a film about it, and I was excited to get to help. Prior to being in film and TV, I worked in theater for a long time, and I produced a lot of theater for other people and not just my own work. And I really miss getting to work with and help other artists. I think so much of being a writer is kind of being stuck in your little isolated bubble and working on the thing for other people to do. And so I kind of jumped at the opportunity to get to involve myself in her project. And by virtue of us being married, it was a little easier to convince her to let me help her. And yeah, it just premiered at South by Southwest, which was super exciting, and will kind of continue to run through other festivals this year. And you can, follow along with that. We have an Instagram account that's Canine Massage Film, but it's very exciting. And she has begun work on what would be her feature directorial debut, which I've also been helping out on.
Congratulations.
Yep.
As a final question, I wanted to ask if you had a favorite line from Spaceman.
That's so hard. Everything Hanush says is my favorite. But I think thematically, I think his line about to Jakub that, you have many boundaries, skinny human, perhaps they are the cause of your loneliness, I think is really funny, but also like incredibly profound and just sort of nails Jakub immediately in a way that I love. So, but Hanush is eminently quotable. Any line of Hanush's is my favorite, probably.
Paul Dano was such a perfect voice
He's
for
incredible.
Hanush. Yeah, because if it would be anyone else, Hanush could be like extremely intimidating, but with Paul Dano's voice, it was perfect. It
I
was actually like
love
comforting.
I know. I really love that Paul also took very seriously the project of what does it mean that I've lived since the beginning of time? And I think came with a very specific goal for how Hanush would feel and be and what his goals were as a creature. And I think that that stuff all comes across in his performance, which is just really, really special. Yeah, I feel very lucky that we got Paul Dano to play an alien spider.
Well, Colby, I'm not gonna hold you any longer. You were already quite generous with your time. I just wanted to thank you because I always say that the films that I like the most are the ones that could teach me something. And I
Mm.
think there's a lot to learn from Spaceman about us, our relationship, and the importance of aligning our goals. So thank you for giving all this food for thought. And I'm really
Thank you.
looking forward to what you have up your sleeve next.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was really nice to get to talk to you and talk about the movie. Thanks.